Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Just texting a contact to ask him if he'll talk to us about this Russian spy story, and he replied saying, I'm giving evidence in Parliament from 10:30 to 11:30. Any other time going to work for you? Just to give you an insight into the bridge of this programme, the massive team of crack troops desperately trying to harvest news and opinion. Of course, I'm joking. I very rarely invite people onto the programme, only if they know more about the issues than we do. I rely daily upon you to steer me through the choppy waters of current affairs, and we'll begin today with some of the choppiest waters of our time, at least in terms of domestic issues that are not, well, I was about to say not matters of life and death, but the more you look at obesity statistics, the more you come to realise that actually this is very much a life and death issue. So what are we going to do about it? Do you remember a few years ago I realised that when I was at school, the chubby kids, and language is important here, because you don't want to sort of make bad situations worse by being a little bit insensitive and crass. And I learned that the hard way, by being very insensitive and crass on issues of obesity when I first started doing this job. I realised a few years ago, you might have been listening that day, that when we were at school, if you're anything like close to my age, you would still be able to remember the name of the biggest kid, the widest kid, the largest kid. You could probably remember the name of the tallest kid as well, which is sort of the point, because it was exceptional. Exceptional to have someone in your class who really struggled at PE, or who really kind of struggled to fit into the uniforms that were available in a relatively small range of sizes. This isn't an exaggeration or even an embellishment, I don't think, because these days you turn up at school and it would not be something that marked you out. I'm sure that bullies can still pick up on body weight as an issue, but bullies will find anything as a kind of entry point for trying to torture and hurt somebody. And that is just true, isn't it? This notion, particularly with children, that something really significant and bad has been allowed to happen. I think I know what it is, but I'm no genius in this field. I had a moment at an airport in Southeast Asia, actually, where it suddenly all made sense to me, because I'm a big fan, as you know, of Jamie Oliver's. I bow to few people in my admiration for him. Anybody, actually, in the current climate of weaponised toxicity, who continues to put themselves in the firing line for the very simple reason that they believe that they are doing good and important work, deserves probably a slightly warmer reception than we're currently giving them in this country. But I'm a big fan of Jamie Oliver's, and I used to be a big proponent of the eat less, exercise more, best way to stop people being obese is to be really vile and rude to them. And then somebody with a serious weight problem came into my life, and I understood the issues in a much more broad and sophisticated way, but I never quite got to the bottom of how this had happened. And then I'm standing at an airport in Southeast Asia. I think it was in Thailand, but it may have been a stopover. And there was a Dairy Queen next to the Burger King. We don't really have Dairy Queens in Britain. They were sort of early ice cream parlours. And I was looking at the sizes. I was paying in baht. There you go. So it must have been Italian. And the sizes of the cartons that you buy. So the smallest one and the biggest one. And there was about 5 different sizes. And I kept looking at it. I think I might have been a bit jet-lagged, and I had an appalling ear infection, so I was dosed up to the eyeballs on all sorts of medication, and I was sort of, you know, how airports can be a bit surreal sometimes. They sort of feel a bit like limbo. You're in between two existences. I like airports for that reason. You never really feel stressed in an airport, unless you're in the process of missing your flight. You're sort of, yeah, I like that. You're in between two worlds, two realities. So I'm in this slightly kind of trippy state of mind, wandering around an airport and staring at this thing, trying to work out what it was about it that was drawing my attention. And I realised that the increase in price for ice cream was tiny. So you'd get quite a lot more ice cream for for not very much money more. And I suddenly realised that it costs them so little to make this stuff that once they've got the costs of transport and packaging and delivery, retail, selling it, staff, all of these costs were in place. The actual product they were selling was almost negligible. So they might as well give you 10 times as much for just a few pennies more, because that's a few pennies more for old rope. All the costs involved in packaging it, transporting it and selling it have already been met for the small portion. So anything on top of the small portion, if the actual product you're selling in the pot is as cheap as chips, then you might as well just charge a few pennies more and give them twice as much. And that means everybody, because we think we're getting a bargain, we all lean towards the massive cartons. Think about fizzy pop, okay? And if you're close to my age and you've got children, the sort of sizes of drinks that they are routinely exposed to. Limitless pop you get in Nando's. You pay for your glass in Nando's and Five Guys, and you then just go up again and again and again to the pump, and you can get out as much Coke as you want. And if you're in Five Guys, they've got like millions of flavours, some of which you've never even heard of. And you can mix your own drinks as well, and they sort of have an amazing, delicious concoction. But when I was a kid, we had something called Panda Pops, which were the size of urine samples. They were tiny, tiny, tiny little vessels. And that was a treat. We now know, of course, that fizzy pop is more or less sugar. It's more or less a sugar suspension. You're not only wrecking your teeth, you're also piling on the pounds. And again, because it's so cheap to produce, I think this started with Mackie D's, didn't it? When you'd go into McDonald's and you'd order a large Coke and it would be like 5 times the size of any Coke you'd ever seen before in your life. But I don't want to sound too rose-tinted, too Brexity, but we were fine back in the day. It was still a treat to have a roller cola or a Panda Pop. It was still a treat to have one of those very, very small. I suppose the equivalent portion now would be the tinnies that you get on a plane. You know, when you get a soda on a plane, a fizzy pop on a plane. It was fine. So I have some sympathy for the kind of anti-nanny state positioning on these sort of stories, but it's only a modicum of sympathy, because as with a lot of knee-jerk anti-positions, it's very, very ignorant, and it essentially involves wealthy people telling poor people not to let other wealthy people try to make their lives better, which brings us back to Jamie Oliver. Oh, how dare he try to make the lives better of people whose parents perhaps aren't lucky enough to have the knowledge and the education that they need to realise that they're poisoning their children and storing up a lifetime of heart disease and diabetes. That's for the diabetes that is lifestyle affected. There is, of course, a version that is not. So, if these companies essentially push and push and push and push, I am left wondering when they stop pushing. Especially in this world of infinite growth, a sort of fundamental economic contradiction at the heart of Western life at the moment is that we live on a planet with finite resources, but we live under economic conditions that demand infinite growth. That's why people like you and me get confused how it can be bad news when a company posts profits of £200 million. And the answer is, well, it was 300 million last year, so it's not growing. And that's apparently disastrous. One day I will get to the bottom of why, but I have a suspicion it sort of goes back to that fundamental conundrum that finite resources, infinite growth, which means that companies are constantly trying to sell more and make more, which is fine, unless, of course, they're property companies, in which case Theresa May thinks you should stop trying to make as much money as possible. And I look at food, and I look at especially processed food, and I think I see two things. I think I see the suggestion that companies should not be allowed to push and push and push and push until we all pop. I feel like the country has missed the creosote now in that Monty Python sketch with the wafer thin mint. Have you seen that? Come on. Everyone said just want wafer thin mint, and they keep feeding this man until he actually explodes. Now, why would you do that? Answer, because every time you put a wafer thin mint in his mouth, you make a few more quids. So I honestly think that the food processing companies, not necessarily for evil intent by any stretch of the imagination, they're like the waiter in the Monty Python, the Mr. Creosote sketch. They're just trying to persuade the country to have just one wafer thin meat, just one more wafer thin meat, and the country's sort of going, oh no, I can't say what Mr. Creosote says in that sketch. I'll be taken off air before the travel, but you know, get lost would be the polite translation. So these food production companies are going, just one wafer thin meat, and we're stuffed already. But if we oh, go on then. So why, for example, would you ever go large in a fast food joint when you've already been given double your daily dose of calories? And then they say, would you like to go large with that? What does that mean? It means more salt, more fat, more reconstituted potatoes, and more fizzy pop. So if you're in your 40s like I am, you think back to your childhood when a small bottle of pop was a treat. I'm talking like 200 mils, less than what you get in a can now. And then you fast forward 40 years to today, where you go into a fast food joint, order a meal that already contains double your daily dose of calories, and then they ask you if you'd like extra sugar with that. That's what they do. Have a nice day. Would you like extra sugar with that? Would you like extra fat with that? Would you like some more hydrogenated oil with that? And then I hear in the back of my mind, as I try and lay this out in a way that will tempt you to pick up the phone and say something fascinating, because I have the other voice in the back of my mind going, but mate, you love this stuff. And you're right, I do. But why do we have to eat so much of it? Answer, we don't have to. So then the question becomes, why do we eat so much of it? And then the answer becomes, because they are shoving it down our necks as a matter of commercial imperative. They need us to eat more of this rubbish to keep growth within their company. It's called upselling, isn't it, in other contexts? Upselling, make more out of the same customer. And that, I think, is why I am on the side of government intervention. Even though 10 years ago I'd have sat here, I know I would have sat here, I'd have got out my banner and I would have absolutely started waving it. How dare they interfere? Eat less, exercise more, personal responsibility. But personal responsibility hinges upon freedom of choice. And if billions of pounds are being spent on telling you to pour more sugar down your throat, if billions of pounds are being spent on telling you to store up a lifetime of illness, heart disease and diabetes for your own children, obviously they don't put it like that, then it's not a free choice, is it? It's not a free choice unless every time you see a junk food advert, you see another advert explaining what junk food is. Then it's a freedom of choice issue. Anyone who's got the word classical liberal on their Twitter profile is almost certainly a complete ninny. But this notion of classical liberalism hinges upon all of the conflicting destinations for your custom having an equal call upon it. And I don't think they do. Look at the money that they spend promoting this stuff. That's why we eat it all. If it didn't work, the advertising industry would collapse. I don't care about knowledge and education. If you've got massive shiny pictures or, you know, girls in bikinis and men with their tops off, if you've got on every street corner a picture of fried chicken that makes it look like the food of the gods, then you're going to eat loads of it. So either they clamp down on the companies' freedom to advertise, which obviously would be like me voting for Christmas as a turkey. My income depends upon advertising. Or we encourage the government to actually force these companies to change the contents, the ingredients of what they're selling. And that's why I think Public Health England deserve our support. Leaving people to make their own choices isn't working because everyone is getting fatter, especially children. Question, how do you stop it from happening? Answer, recognise that people aren't making free choices. It's not a free choice. If it was a free choice, then the same amount of effort and expenditure would go into flogging tap water and apples as goes into flogging frozen lasagna and fried chicken. I don't think you can argue with that. But let's find out. Michael's in Taunton. Michael, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome.
I find it very sad that it's, Health England that are taking this up, not our government. Personally, I see it as criminal that our government aren't doing something to come down hard on these food companies. I'm 5'8". I'm an ex-paratrooper, and I got a chronic back condition, and I reached the weight of 16 stone 6, and I realised I had to do something about that. I tried one weight, diet plan, which almost killed me in itself. And I went to Swimming World.
Why?
I'm not promoting, because it was calorie counting, and I just couldn't cope with that.
No, I know what you mean. Sorry, I thought it was a figure of speech when you said it almost killed you. I thought you might have been on some weird breatharian diet or something like that. Go on.
Well, my cousin was doing Swimming World, and I'm not here to promote Swimming World, but
Fine.
It's not a diet, it's a healthy eating plan. And in a very short period of time, I understood why I was putting on weight. Then I realised how incredibly difficult it is to shop and not put on weight. To eat out is a minefield. We seem to become very childlike when it comes to such products as McDonald's, Burger King, and the others, Kentucky.
Yes.
We seem to go back to...
It's a good way of putting it, childlike. It appeals to quite primitive. I think the science is that with sugar and fat, it does affect your brain in quite an addictive and short-term uplifting way, which is why I've argued in the past that the less money you've got, the more likely you are to have, 2 litres of iron brew, because the sugar rush and the temporary dopamine hits that you get from that, you can't get from going for a long walk in the country or doing something that wealthier people can perhaps do more easily.
It'd be interesting to see obesity levels in, between the classes. But
yes, it would.
Another study. So, especially with our society now and stress levels, you have a lot of comfort eating and also comfort drinking, which piles the pounds on as well, alcohol.
Yes.
To soothe our stresses and hurts, and that's what it does temporarily. So I've lost 2.5 stone now.
Well done.
And it's taken me about 6 months to do that, and I now know how to keep it off.
And just for anyone listening who's reaching for the nanny state snowflake button, I would remind them that you mentioned at the outset of the call that you used to earn a crust as a paratrooper.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at the mind over matter things.
Well, that was my point, yes.
Sometimes it don't matter how strong your mind is with certain issues. And so I believe absolutely that the government does need to step in to protect society, deal with these food companies, because at the end of the day, I do see it as wickedness, pure greed and the love of money, which is the root of many wrongdoings in our world.
Oh, you're sounding like St. Paul now, but I'm not going to argue with you. Can you hold my hand while I make one of my slightly ridiculous leaps?
Yeah.
Right? Because remember yesterday, I don't know if you were listening yesterday, but Theresa May made this ludicrous speech in which she said it's absolutely outrageous that property companies have got all this land and they're not building on it. Please build on it and make less money. By the way, free market or something like that. I forget the exact details of the speech, but the idea that these businesses are ever going to curtail their profit process voluntarily, it occurred to me while you were talking, is exactly the same as the conversation we're having today. We're just going to sit and wait. We're going to trust them to be more responsible. We're going to we're going to get all the big fast food guys to come in. Remember that the head man at Carillion was a former corporate responsibility advisor to Theresa May. We're going to get all our friends in business, and David Cameron, get all our friends in business to come in and sit around a big table, and then we'll have a lovely chat, and then they'll go away, and they will deliberately make less money. That's never going to happen, is it?
No, because also you have to look at this. If this happens in this country, and we're supposed to be one of the leading, developed countries in the world, what's going to be the roll-on to other countries? If say, other countries and the United States, who've got a bigger obesity...
Well, they went first. We're sort of waddling along in their wake, aren't we? And then you look at some other European countries that... the more to do with this industrialised production and advertising, the more fat children you'll have. A friend of mine, became a friend who was driving me around Crete in the summer, was telling me that McDonald's is strictly for the tourists, but the kids want to go there, and he's worried, because it means that the kids could end up with the same problems our kids have got. So you, for the record, I might keep score on this, is it the sort of thing that governments or quangos should be interfering or intervening in? Should these companies be essentially policed? Answer is yes, because they're selling stuff that's making us as sick as parrots.
Yeah, and the difference I would put between perhaps the housing industry and the food is it's our health directly. I've heard said the second biggest killer, cancer related, is obesity.
Yeah, but if we were to put down the two things that are most important to the human condition, we'd probably go for health and housing, wouldn't we? We'd go for a roof over your head, shelter and sustenance. They are the most basic of provisions for humanity, and that's why I'm sticking with my knitting together there of how absurd it is, of especially a Conservative Prime Minister whose entire government is propped up by massive donations from private industry, is suddenly going to turn around to private industry and say, please make less money, please make less money. And that's essentially what anybody who doesn't want Public Health England to prevail on this is also doing. They're saying to poor people, oh, you carry on stuffing your face, because they are not saying out loud, so that these massive companies can carry on making lots of money. 10:28 is the time. Michael, mind how you go. Claire's in Cuffley. Claire, what would you like to say?
I just want to... My son, who is nearly 12, he's 11, has...
Thanks for clarifying.
He was 10.5 pounds when he was born, so
Right.
he's always been big. But in the last few years, he started to get fat. And there's no... We can't understand why. We're very healthy. I'm kind of, I exercise.
Yes.
We're very slim. My husband's slim. My daughter is like a stick. But my poor son is just a big Billy Bunter. And he does lots of exercise. But my concern is that he's 11 and 12, so I control what he eats. He
Yes.
has no spending money himself. He's at school where he gets, you pay the money and you can see what he eats every day.
Right.
So we're controlling it.
So-
My concern is that when he gets to 15, 16, he's going to have his own money and his choices will be the chicken shops and the McDonald's, because that is just what they want. They want the power drinks and the Lucozades and whatever else. And I just think there must be some kind of control, because 14, 15-year-olds don't have control.
Well, you can
And-
say that again.
Well, yeah, and so they're just, they go with the flow, and most kids can maybe get away with eating junk for a bit of the time, but other kids just can't. And I worry that he doesn't realise. He knows, because we talk about it in a kind of positive middle-class way about healthy eating and all that
Yes.
sort of stuff.
Do you call him Billy Bunter?
Not to his face.
No, okay.
I
Just
mean,
checking. Probably not helpful.
no.
Also, probably a cultural reference that would be lost on him. I doubt he's got Greyfriars in his sort of frame of
But
reference.
he's a lovely affable
Of course he is.
kid.
Of course he is. Of
And,
course he is.
And he doesn't, he never. We are completely healthy in our family and very.
And if your boy is at risk, then imagine what risk the children who don't have informed, educated, concerned parents would be at risk. That's the thing that I find so obnoxious and offensive about wealthy right-wing journalists, essentially saying, "Why? Who are these people to tell you that you should try and ensure that your children don't grow up with diabetes and heart disease? God, meddling middle-class do-gooders. If you want your kids to grow up fat with diabetes and heart disease, then buy the Sun." It's 10:31. And everything's linked. Everything's kind of knitted together. Sometimes it seems that way to me. Other days it doesn't. Everything seems random and chaotic. A bit like Italy at the moment. A best line on Italy from 5 Star is that they are Eurosceptic but not Euro-suicidal, like the British. So don't let the right-wing newspapers persuade you that this is anything more than yet another Italian lurch towards political chaos. You know, the reason Silvio Berlusconi can't be... I don't know if anyone's told you this. The reason why Silvio Berlusconi can't lead the coalition? Because he's a convicted fraudster. But, down with Brussels and terrible... What is it today that they're terrible at? Not being fraudsters, I guess. Down with people who aren't fraudsters. So... And speaking of fraudsters, I was just thinking back to what I said. I thought I might have defrauded you when I said I just presumed that the Sun would be encouraging people today to carry on feeding their children food that will see them growing up with heart disease and diabetes and obesity. And then I suddenly thought, crikey, what if they haven't? What if they've actually broken the habit of a lifetime and come out on the side of their readers? I could have just done them a grave disservice. Luckily, page 10 canters to the rescue. When the government backed the idiotic sugar tax, we warned it was just the start. Now the nanny state fanatics of Public Health England. I've been trying to work out why it's so easy to predict what way right-wing media goes, and I have to apologise to you, because it's bleeding obvious, and you probably worked it out for yourself years ago. Close your eyes, forget names, ask yourself, with any given news story, what would be in the interests of very, very rich people who are trying to get richer? The kind of people who've got a few million quid to invest in a company that flogs frozen lasagnas or fried chicken. The kind of people who might have quiet investments in the franchises of the fast food joints, or might own a bunch of shares of the actual fast food companies. Just ask yourself, what would an amoral billionaire want from this story? So here's a story about Public Health England suggesting that we need to take concerted national action to stop your children from growing up with heart disease, diabetes and obesity, shortening their lives, diminishing their quality of life. What would an amoral billionaire want you to do with that story? Answer: poo-poo it, kick it into the long grass, take the mickey, employ some meaningless but slightly persuasive slogans like nanny state and do-gooder. Who wins? The amoral billionaire who doesn't care if your children grow up with diabetes, heart disease and obesity, as long as he can make a few more quid every time they order turkey Twizzlers. It really is increasingly, to me, looking like everything is that simple. But then again, I worry sometimes that I might be turning into David Icke. It's coming up to 20 to 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Speaking of the Sun, as I found that story on page 10, I found another one, which is, well, it seems to involve their journalists harassing victims of sexual assault, but I shall clarify the details before sharing them with you. 10:39 is the time. Back to food. Danny's in Yule, which someone has very helpfully put on the screen, pronounced Yule. Thank you. Danny, what would you like to say?
I think that foods in general need to have fat and salt, and I think we need to phase it out, because I think we do have a problem. You can see it around you. People are much fatter.
Who's we, though? How are we going to phase it out unless there is government action, unless there is leadership from the top, as it were?
I'll give you an example, right? I take my kids into McDonald's every blue moon, and every time I go in there, I'm forced to wait in the car park for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, because I ask for unsalted chips. And I said to the girl behind the jump, I said, listen, I want 2 Happy Meals with unsalted chips, and I'm forced to wait. And I say to them, surely...
That's interesting.
I'd say, surely you'd give every Happy Meal would come with unsalted chips, wouldn't they? And they go, no. And I go, well, why not?
KFC does.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, why would you do that? I mean, and also, I want to say...
because the salt is addictive. Can I tell you a terrible story?
Yeah.
A really terrible story about a lad I know who was in care. And I'm not kind of showing off or anything, but I do, because I was adopted, I do some work with some adoption charities, and I take a keen interest in these issues, and I met the lad. And when he was placed with his foster family after being taken into care, he couldn't speak. He was still very young. He got excited at the sight of McDonald's, and they took him in, and he used to lick the salt off the chips and put the chips back on the table.
Oh, my God.
2.5 years old. That's why, mate. That's the addiction, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I'm going to say something contentious as well.
Aye.
I think that women's roles in society plays a big part.
No, it's not contentious, mate. That's obnoxious.
No, I don't know. I'm being serious. I remember I grew up, and I lived partially with my nan, and I can remember coming home. My nan had time on her hands, really. She was at home.
Oh, OK. No, I take that back. You're not being obnoxious. You mean just home cooking. We don't have to start making it sound as if we want the little lady handcuffed to the stove and warming up our slippers before we get home from a hard day down the coal mine. You're just saying that home cooking the nature of cooking has changed because the nature of domestic life has changed.
Yeah, so women are working more. Women are working this generation probably more than ever. If you go back a generation, less women work than the generation before, less women work. Everyone's so busy these days, and the thing is, you know, people. I think a lot of people don't know how to cook.
James, I mean, you could easily find someone who doesn't know how to cook, but who still manages not to be sort of fat and poorly. It's the pressure, it's the encouragement, it's the fact that you can't buy the chips without salt. Why can't you buy the chips without the salt? This is going to be one of my new catchphrases, I can tell, because the amoral billionaire knows that your kids will eat a lot more chips if they're lathered in salt, and that's why they'll go back in the next day, and when they're teenagers and they leave school and they've got their own money, they'll be in there because they get this weird kick, this dopamine hit out of sugar, salt and fat. That's why they do it. So how are we going to stop it from happening? We have to order them to stop doing it. We have to order them to put less salt in their food, less sugar in their food and less fat in their food. Don't we?
Yeah, we do. James, listen to this. I've got to tell you this.
Yeah, go on.
About 30 odd years ago, the first McDonald's opened in Crystal Palace.
That's right.
My mate and his mum went in there, And she walked up to the counter and he was really excited. And his mum went up to the counter and said, "Hi, can I have 2 McDonald's, please?"
They probably got given something. I mean, what was the choice like in those days? There was probably only it'd be a Big Mac, wouldn't it? I suppose 2 McDonald's.
He got given a Big Mac. And he was a little kid. And
I love it.
Just asked for 2 McDonald's. That's what, you know.
That was the branding. That's how. But that's almost brainwashing. That's almost cultish. 10:43 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The questions continue. Danny, lovely stuff, mate. Thank you. Do you know what? Can we? Let's go clever, right? Let's go highbrow. Deep end. Come on, follow me. We're swimming up to the deep end now. And this is a question about my amoral billionaire analogy. Because I look at sometimes the newspapers and I look at people in my profession and I don't understand why they're encouraging you to encourage your children to be fat and riddled with heart disease and diabetes until I bring in this amoral billionaire. And some people in this line of work are in thrall to amoral billionaires. Usually the newspaper writers I'm thinking of, chiefly, because they have no choice. So why else would anybody object? Like with seatbelts, no one made a profit out of that. So let me think of a better example. People who complained about the smoking ban. Who would complain about the smoking ban? Obviously, if you're an addict, you're going to be unhappy about it. But in terms of mobilising media or political forces to complain about the smoking ban, what's that you say? You want a government to actually reduce the number of citizens who die horrible deaths from lung cancer? Ah, you meddling, interfering middle-class do-gooders. Who would be against a smoking ban? Drink driving, even, you could argue, because they will sell less alcohol. So usually, if you're struggling to understand a position adopted by somebody on the right, in the media, or in politics, ask yourself what an amoral billionaire would want to happen to that story. And you'll probably get a better understanding of why the Sun today is suggesting that this proposal is bad. Yeah, we want more kids with heart disease. We want more kids with diabetes. How dare they interfere with their sugar tax and their nanny state? I think I'm going to have to retire. I think we've solved everything with that amoral billionaire analogy. I was just sort of thinking, well, why would they want to... I mean, prisons in America, amoral billionaires, they own the prisons, which is why they're not putting any effort at all into curbing reoffending rates. They need people to go to prisons. I think there have been cases in America where companies have kind of sued states because there weren't enough prisoners arriving, so their profit, because you get paid per prisoner, the profit margins go up. I think we get a little bit carried away sometimes fearing the privatisation of the NHS. If you're privatising the NHS, then it doesn't matter if your kids get heart disease and diabetes, because they'll have to pay to get treated, and they'll be paying to get treated in hospitals that are owned by the same people that own the fast food joints and the food providers that have got them diabetes and heart disease in the first place. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a communist. Ian's in Hackney. Ian, what's going on?
Hey, James.
Hi.
It's an issue that I'm very close to myself after becoming unwell quite a few years ago, and then the only way to have got better, the doctor didn't really provide much support, and the way that I got better was actually changing my diet, taking certain herbs. I've made a good recovery now.
I can't really hear you, mate. I'm sure it's not your fault, but if you can just be clear that your phone is...
Sure. Is that better?
Yes, it is, actually. Go on. So, blame is possibly not quite the right word, because I'm sure that you'd accept that in large part your health was your responsibility. But as we've established, it's not a free choice when they're spending billions trying to get you to eat rubbish and spending diddly squat trying to get you to eat grapes. What would you blame for your health decline, for your health getting so bad, weight-wise?
My health isn't really the issue. I want to stick back to, stick on the obesity subject.
Yeah.
But what it did do, it gave me the motivation really to explore it and understand how the system works. And it's very true what you were saying earlier on about the press, about people who are wealthy, have maybe a financial interest. But
I can't think of another explanation. Why are you trying to get my kid to eat even... So they've just ordered a Coke. That's a treat. And now you're offering them something 8 times the size of what was a treat when I was a kid. What other reason can there be for a company doing that other than trying to get a few more quid out of my pocket? There just isn't one, is there?
I mean, the only, commitment they have is to their shareholders and to their own pockets. They don't care whether we get big. But I think it's bigger than that as well. I think it comes down to the government. Well, your first caller mentioned that the government needs to step in.
Yes.
We need to find out who these people are. I don't think they're members of the government like we know it. They're not politicians. I believe they're people who have come through from the industry.
So it's like a conveyor belt.
What, the Public Health England people are a policeman from the food lobby?
Yes. Have a look at the FDA alone. Have a look at the FDA alone. Find out who they are.
Well, that's in America.
Industry. Yes, but...
Well, we're not in America.
Over here.
Yeah,
but the same issue applies. James, in the US, you've got something called SAD that's...
Mate, I'm going to knock it on the head, because I appreciate this is an area of enthusiasm and interest for you, but you're not really addressing any of the points or issues that we're raising.
Please stick with me, because I will.
No. Sorry, mate.
Come on.
No. All right, well, say something interesting about Britain now.
Okay, I'll keep it to the advert that you just put out there a minute ago, which was all about obesity causing cancer. I think they're overlooking it. I think that there are other things, like it is the things that we're putting into our body that's causing ill health.
I think we can all agree about that, Ian, mate. Have a great day. Jessica's in Woolwich. Jessica, what would you like to say?
Hello, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I am one of the fat kids. I was the fattest kid in my class in primary school. And
were you the only fat kid? Pretty much.
Yeah, I'm 28 now.
Oh,
so
then probably not.
I think there was a few chubbies, but I was the fat one.
Okay.
Excuse my language, I'm a bit...
Don't be daft. You're talking about yourself. You can say, just don't swear. You can say what you want.
So I'm one of 5 siblings, and we've all now grown up. And out of the 4 girls, each and every single one of us are obese.
Okay.
We always have been obese. And I look at our parenting, I look at what we used to eat as children, and it's squarely at what we used to eat as children.
Yeah.
So...
And you ate a lot of rubbish.
Yeah, but my mum used to take us to McDonald's after school, pretty much on a daily basis. And then we'd go home, have dinner when Dad came back from work. And then we'd have snacks at night. And there's home videos of us walking around with 2-litre bottles of Coke in our mouths.
Oh, wow. See, that to me, and this isn't a kind of snobby thing, because I love pop, and my mum's a bit of a snob. She'll probably kill me for saying that. She goes a bit Hyacinth Bouquet sometimes, and she used to get absolutely furious with me if I were drinking pop in the street, if I bought a tin of Coke or something. But the idea of a 2-litre bottle, we only saw that on birthdays, and that's an age thing. That's because I'm 20 years older than you. You only saw 2-litre pop bottles when your parents were entertaining or on your birthday party. That was it. Whereas for you, it was commonplace and daily.
I mean, looking back, I think in the 90s there was a massive cultural change towards the food, what we used to eat. And it's continued with that. So you now go home, ready meals are so available. You go and get lunch at work, and it's not it's something you do.
And you get addicted to the rubbish stuff. It's the sugar and the salt and the fat that gives you the dopamine hits in the brain. That's why you need to drink and eat more. It's why you double up. It's why you go large. It's why you buy 2 litres instead of 200 mils. And where does it end? It ends with Mr. Flipping Creosote.
I mean, it's completely ruined my health.
Oh, Jessica.
I'm nearly 15 stone now. I'm 5'4", so my BMI is obese. To get into the healthy weight category, I have to lose 5 stones. So that's a third of my body weight. My fertility is trashed.
Oh dear. And what do you say to people who say it's all your fault? It's your own fault. Everybody knows what's good and what's bad, and why should everybody else suffer who manages to eat rubbish stuff as a moderate treat? Why should they suffer in order to protect you from yourself? They would say, I think they're idiots, but how would you respond to them?
So I sat down with my GP and I went through my diet, because he said the only reason why you're fat is because you eat too much, then you burn.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm a keen cyclist. I regularly do 100 miles a week on the bike. I'm very good with what I eat.
Yeah.
And I showed him my food diary. So I showed him my daily calorie and I eat less than 1,600 calories a day every day. Yesterday I had 6 of my 5 a day. The day before that I had 11. Obviously it's the quality of food you're eating, so everything that I eat is organic. But the issue with me is my hormones. Because of the food I used to eat as a child, my hormones, I have so much fat levels around my abdomen that I've got polycystic ovaries, and that messes around with your hormone levels, which makes it harder to lose weight, and it's a vicious circle.
What are you going to do?
Well, the only thing I can do is lose fat.
Okay.
And the only way I can really lose fat is by severely restricting my diet.
Are you going to?
If it gets me healthier, then yes.
Good luck.
Thanks.
And I'm so glad you called, because you sound to me like the unwitting victim of a system. People listening to this are perfectly entitled to be judgmental and pompous and wrong, but you sound to me as if you're the unwitting victim of a system, because as a child, what chance did you have? And I didn't realise that what you do as a child can impact physically, hormonally, on what you become as an adult. And that is why these people who put themselves out there to get abused and criticised are so brave, because they are doing what your mum didn't have the nous to do. So they are actually protecting the next generation of children from their own parents' lack of knowledge and concern. And that's not a criticism, it's a statement of fact. Ellen is in Worcestershire. Whereabouts in Worcestershire, Ellen?
Bewdley.
Oh, I love Bewdley. I've been in the Black Boy lately.
No.
Why not?
No.
Merchant House for fish and chips, isn't it?
Yes, lovely fish and chips.
Very nice in the... What did you ring in to say, Ellen?
I know where it's in now. Worked very hard. I've got his mum's out there. And I feel sometimes I can cross...
It's a terrible phone line, my love. Is there anything we can do about it?
No, I don't think so.
Sounds like you're in the River Severn. I can't do it. I know what you were going to say. Beth just told me. You feel sometimes that they're nagging you to cook in the kitchen, and after a hard day's work down the coal mine or on the Severn Valley Railway, it's the last thing you want to do. And I understand that, which is why no one's suggesting that you should come home every day and cook a 5-course meal from scratch. And I know you were going to give Jamie a mild ribbing as well, but his last big book was 15-minute recipes. You can do 15 minutes when you've got in from work, Alan, for heaven's sake. I do realise that I just plugged the best fish and chip shop in Bewdley while talking to you about the dangers of obesity and eating junk food, but everything in moderation.